part is an addition to or comes from the general liberal values, right? Now in neoliberalism, these roles change. We now put capitalism in the center. That's the second circle diagram. And in the second diagram, right, now it's the market that relates all the other spheres. It's the market who's going to decide how work and the family relate to each other. It's the market that's going to decide what people are taught in education. And liberalism is now demoted to just a philosophy. So in this case, liberalism is the philosophy that goes best with a market economy, right? But the goal is to make money. The goal is not to be free. Being free is kind of the story you tell people to have a system that's all about capital accumulation, right? So you can see they're the same thing, but in a different proportion, right? The market and making money is so much more important in neoliberalism. It's the dominant drive, not the freedom aspect of it. If that's too abstract to you, let me explain it with fast food. In North America, you order hamburger with fries, right? You order hamburger and you get fries with that. In Belgium, where I'm from, our national dish is fries. You order fries, and with that, you could get a hamburger. But you get more fries than the hamburger, right? So they're the same thing, but in different proportions. So liberalism is hamburger with fries, neoliberalism is fries with a hamburger, right? It's market with some freedom. The other one is freedom with a market. Maybe that's a bit abstract, but it should become clear, this idea, once my lecture goes on. Now, as you can see, I'm a very big neoliberal, but I won't let that ruin my objectivity here. No, what my claim will be in this lecture, I'm not going to tell you that neoliberalism doesn't work or that we should eat the rich, but because it does work, we're in it. Life continues, life goes on. My angle on teaching neoliberalism, which I think is quite unique, is I want to highlight how utopian it is. A lot of people critiqued, including most of you, critiqued communism for being utopian, right? To over-trusting on things. So as we will see, neoliberalism is as utopian in the sense that it perceives itself as perfect, and it puts a whole lot of faith on certain things. And it's a very gambling ideology, let's say. So it's as radical and as utopic as communism, once you understand what it really wants to do. And that, I think, is an interesting angle, right? So I will not say it's bad, I will not say it doesn't work. I will say it's very radical and very utopic once we truly grasp what it is. Now, where does it come from? Neoliberalism, as you might guess by now, is the big comeback of capitalism in political thought, right? This is the second wave of this strongly pro-capitalist theory. Second wave, because the first wave kind of died in World War II, right? Initially, you had liberalism, which was very dominant and ruled most of Europe, but that ended in a catastrophe. It helped cause a massive crisis in the 1930s, just like Marx predicted. Europe was about to turn communist, but then the war happened and the Nazis kind of snatched that. So it turned fascist instead. But in any case, right, both these ideologies, communism, fascism, are reactions to liberalism and its failure. So when this all accumulated in a giant fight of everyone against everyone, and when that fight finally ended, liberalism was not exactly a very popular theory, right? It was basically politically bankrupt. It failed and it led the world to destruction. So that's the area in which socialism rose. That's what I explained Tuesday, right? In this time, socialism became the dominant ideology, and it caused in the 1960s the rollout of the welfare state, and probably the most prosperous era in history. Like this biggest gap between poverty and not being in poverty is probably 1960s. Everywhere, also in Mexico. So socialism did very good, gave it the most prosperous era in history, but there was a crisis somewhere in the 1970s, not because of anything economical. It started with Saudi Arabia being angry at the world. But this crisis of the 70s opened the door for criticism, right? There were cracks in the system. And neoliberals saw their chance to bring back this capitalist idea by head-on attacking democratic socialism. It was critiqued as a failure, although it was not failing in the sense that classic liberalism failed. But anyway, there was a crisis, there was unemployment, and there was something to critique. There would be a lot of attacks on the welfare state because it was seen as too expensive, at least for these times of crisis, right? It's not too expensive if you have growth, but if things go bad, then the tax base drops, and they would say, well, you know, we could get out of this crisis if we would lower taxes, and therefore we need to cut spending, and thus we need to get rid of all this socialism. Plus, dear student, socialism, right? It leads to all these lazy ninis. It leads to things like, you know, people having free time on Saturdays. What are they going to do with that free time? Do drugs, of course. And what about all these women, right, who now have equal rights and minimum wages and all these things? What is that going to lead to? To them leaving their abusive husbands, of course. And what does that lead to? To more single families. And that's bad for society. So all this empowerment nonsense is breaking up the structure of society. Plus, you should forget anything your teacher told you. Socialism and communism are the same thing. Ask Frenna. So there must be fought because communism is evil, right? So all of these kind of together in a big push to come up with a different theory of the case. And the theory was this: yes, capitalism is troubled. Yes, all these bad things are happening. But the problem is not that we have too much capitalism. The problem, dear students, is that we don't have enough capitalism. We're going to solve the problems of capitalism by creating more of them. We're going to go not around the wall, we're going to go through the wall. So the theory of the case here, socialism, right? Capitalism is problematic, therefore we must control it. Neoliberalism, capitalism is problematic because it's not capitalist enough. If we only had more competition, more free trade, then all these problems would go away. That's very basic in neoliberal ideology. You solve the problems of by having more capitalism. You fight fire with fire. Is the idea. Is the good idea? We shall see. Now, that's kind of theoretically where it came from, right? In real world politics, neoliberalism still started in 1970s and 80s. Most known in the United States with Ronald Reagan, the actor who became president. Trump is not the first one. And in United Kingdom with Margaret Thatcher, who you like because of Netflix and probably no other reason. Margaret Thatcher was probably of the both of them the hardest and the most true neoliberal of them. But both of them didn't want to fully try this in their own country, right? It was too high risk, would face too much resistance to dismantle the welfare state. So the Americans came with a plan of why don't we try this idea? And the Americans is not Reagan himself. Reagan didn't really grasp too much of these things. These were his advisors. Why don't we try this idea in some third world country, right? Or not even third world, just some non-Western country. So they looked across the map and their eye fell on Chile, because Chile back then was ruled by Salvador Allende, which was elected socialist, quite far left guy. And I said, this guy is successful, we should get rid of him. So they reached out to one of his generals, General Pinochet, and they offered him a deal. They said, if you start a coup against your leader, we're going to back you and you can become president, right? As long as you enforce these economic policies on Chile. And as planned was done, he took power, killed the socialists, and Chile started to privatize everything and do everything according to the neoliberal book. Fun fact, once democracy returned, people immediately vote socialist again. But anyway, from that point onwards, this ideology spread. It also reached us with our friend Carlos Salinas de Gortari, also not coming to power democratically, but rigging elections and staying in power by killing his opponent. That's when Mexico turned neoliberal, right? So in most cases, neoliberalism didn't really enter via democratic means in our side of the world. It did in Europe and United States. So from then onwards, it spread and became more or less the dominant ideology. But you might not know that, because neoliberalism is kind of hard to spot if you don't know what you're looking for. That's because neoliberalism is almost never pure. You almost never find a president that is purely like this, right? In practice, they will mix with other types of right-wing politics, because neoliberalism as a theory, as a raw theory, and I try to say this objectively, just based on kind of like opinion polls, etc., is not very popular. This is not something that kind of logically appeals to a lot of people. It appeals to some people, but just as a raw theory, this is not as persuasive as some other theories. So what they try to do is they try to mix this with other things, right? Because at the end of the day, this is about money. They have other values too, but they're less important. Neoliberalism is a means justify the end type of ideology, unlike liberalism, which is very principle based, right? Individual freedom, etc., etc., rights. Neoliberalism is less about that. It's more about, at the end, capitalist growth. So they will very often mix with other policies. For example, with conservatives, right? They'll say, okay, you're against abortion. We're against abortion too. If that's what it takes for people to vote for us. Oh, you're for abortion. We're for abortion too, right? They can go with any other ideology. They can go with fascism, with Trump, for example, is a nice combination of both. They can go sometimes with more progressive politicians, like Bill Clinton, for example. Neoliberalism mixes in well with things. If they want to appeal to woke people, they'll put a woman in charge. It doesn't really matter, right? As long as capital advances. So that's the strength of this ideology. It mixes well with other ideologies because it's quite cheap in its bargains, right? And what it's willing to do. And thereby it became mainstream, right? This diluted neoliberalism was the dominant ideology of the last 30 years in most countries, both in countries but also in international organizations. And this is what you grew up with. You might not notice that because you're in it, right? Just like a fish doesn't know that it's in the water, you might have never realized you grew up inside this ideology. That's why I want to make it very explicit today. Another reason why you not realize that is because the word neoliberalism is not used by neoliberals. Most Mexicans didn't know that word until AMLO's inaugural speech, where he talked for 2 hours about neoliberalism, and that was the most Googled word in Mexico that day. And it's because neoliberal parties don't call themselves neoliberal. Neoliberalism is an academic term. It's kind of imposed on this ideology by academics. So you have a lot of socialist parties in the world that's called the Socialist Party. You have very few neoliberal parties that are called neoliberal party. They usually call themselves conservative or liberal or Acción Nacional or something like that, right? Or orthodox, even if they are following this ideology. So it's a bit of a chameleon type ideology, not because it's deceptive, it's not, just because it blends in well with other things. And in the last decade, though, neoliberalism stopped being so dominant. I think, especially today, it is not that popular, right? The idea that the state should do nothing doesn't really mix well with pandemics. But until, let's say, the last 5 years, it was very dominant until fascism made its big comeback. It lost a lot of ground to that. So that's historically where we should orient it. Now, on a philosophical ground, right? How is this different from liberalism? Neoliberalism is quite a consistent ideology. It has actual fundaments to it. And one of those is objectivism. Objectivism is a philosophy by Miss Ayn Rand. She is the wonderful lady you see in the little picture, Russian-American philosopher. Ayn Rand was very smart in how she went about this. She looked at other people like Marx, etc., and she noticed that they were writing very thick, complex, abstract books, right? And if you want to be a Marxist, you need to get through all these books, and that's a bit tedious. And a lot of other theories were like this too. They would write actual political scientific works, right? Like Rousseau's theory on the general will. So she said, I need to reach other people less basically adventure stories in which the rich were the heroes who were going to save the world. And these novels got incredibly popular. Her most famous novel is called Atlas Shrugged, which is probably after the Bible the most read book in the United States. Atlas Shrugged, and I think it was a follow-up of it called Fountainhead. And both are stories about rich people saving the world, right? So you can see where this is going to go. And in these stories of these heroic rich people, and only them have the power to kind of save the nation, she started elaborating her theory. And one of the interesting parts here is how this relates to responsibility. So let's go through it really fast, right? She starts from the idea that all people are rational and that all people have free will. And I like that. I think that's a nice consistent base to build a liberal theory on. Much better than the very old liberals who kind of still were with this stupid model of, oh, people just avoid pain and try to get pleasure, and you're kind of determined in that sense. I like Ayn Rand's version better. And therefore, she said, we are responsible for our actions. That's a jump, right? Or at least that you're fully responsible. You could argue that you're not conscious of everything that happens to you. But they would say, okay, you could say that, right? That we are responsible for our actions. And therefore, she would say, since I'm only responsible for my actions, I should only look after myself, right? I should follow my own self-interest. I have nothing to do with you. You are you. And whatever happens to you is your problem, not mine. So she says people should fully go after their own self-interest. And people are therefore fully responsible for their own fate. Whatever happens to you is your fault, right? Whatever ends up happening to you, all outcomes at the end of the day can be reduced to what the individual does. So there's no basis for solidarity, no empathy, nothing, right? Just raw self-interest. And thus, according to this, the main values of this theory are going to be ambition, right? This drive, this self-interested drive. Mostly in her sense to make money, not to get power politically, but to make money, and negative freedom. If you remember from my earlier lecture on liberalism, I made distinction between negative and positive freedom, right? Positive freedom is the ability to actually do things. Negative freedom is the freedom to not be stopped, to not be restrained. So that's very important to neoliberalism, that people are not interfered with, let's say. At least in philosophy, right? We're talking about philosophy. She was not a politician, she was a philosopher. And this leads to some interesting positions, one of them that I want to share with you, right? So Ayn Rand has this whole argument against morality, an explicit argument against just the concept of ethics, even. She would say that people, you should not ask people to do things. You should not ask people either legally, you should not oblige a person to do something, or even morally oblige them to do something. Because if I need to help you, right, it's kind of like I'm your slave, she would say. So you're in front of me, you broke your arm or you're bleeding, but hey man, I was doing something else. And if I have to say what I'm doing, then I am kind of a slave to your will and I'm no longer free, and that's scandalous. If I would help you if you're bleeding in front of me. So she says a man becomes more or less like an enslaved animal if we are legally or morally required to help someone else. There's all kind of other interesting arguments. For example, she's an explicit argument against love. And you might say, teacher, but you're making this sound too weird, right? You're portraying her like a witch. This is not fair. She's a nice lady. Because if this is true, you can also not have positive rights, right? You cannot have a right to healthcare. because that would mean that somebody then needs to help you, and that person then would become a slave. You say, teacher, this is nonsense. They cannot literally say what you're just saying. Oh, they can. Let me show you. Let me click this link. Let's see if it's going to work. Normally it doesn't, but let me stop presenting. I guess you have to do that. And let me try to share my screen. Do you see Bernie?
Yes.
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 Do you hear Bernie?
No.
No.
Okay, how do I fix this?
I think when you share, it gives you the option in Teams.
Right up
And
when you click it.
Yeah, that little window closed on me. Include system audio. Okay, so this is debate between Bernie Sanders, a socialist, and my friend Rand Paul, which is a neoliberal senator. And they have a debate about healthcare, right? I want you to pay attention to what Paul is saying, so you don't think I make this stuff up. Paul is direct inspired by Ayn Rand. His name is after it, right? It's called Rand Paul. He was named after her. This is a very direct link.
I believe many people in my own state believe that healthcare, GHT, regardless of income, that every American has the right to the best quality healthcare that the system can offer regardless of income. That if you're a low-income kid, you're a wealthy,
You hear him?
you have the same opportunity to access the healthcare system.
Not much.
If you could turn the volume up a little bit.
Okay, let's see.
I believe that every person ought to get good health care. And the Hippocratic Oath says that I would provide health care regardless of whether...
Do you hear her?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
good.
Yes.
pays me or not. So I definitely believe that people need health care.
Give the mic over to Senator Paul.
Thank you very much. With regard to the idea of whether or not you have a right to a health care, you have to realize what that implies. It's not an abstraction. I'm a physician. That means you have a right to come to my house and conscript me. It means you believe in slavery. It means that you're going to enslave not only me, but the janitor at my hospital, the person who cleans my office, the assistants who work in my office, the nurses. If you have a right to their services, basically, once you imply a belief in a right to someone's services, do you have a right to plumbing? Do you have a right to water? Do you have a right to food? You're basically saying that you believe in slavery. You're saying you believe in taking and extracting from another person. Our founding documents were very clear about this. You have a right to pursue happiness, but there's no guarantee of physical comfort. There's no guarantee of concrete items. In order to give something concrete or someone's surface, you got to take it from someone. So there's an implied threat of force. If I'm a physician in your community and you say you have a right to health care, do you have a right to beat down my door with the police, escort me away, and force me to take care of you? That's ultimately what the right to free health care would be. If you believe in a right to health care, you're believing in basically the use of force to conscript someone to do your bidding. Now, just because it's a noble thing to believe that we are obligated as Christians, we are obligated through the Hippocratic Oath, we have always done this. Since the beginning of modern medicine, we have always provided 100% access. I do it in exchange for privileges. I do it because I believe in the Hippocratic Oath, but my hospital also says to me, you can only operate in this hospital if you agree to see everyone coming through the emergency room. I always have. We have always treated. We have always had 100% access through our emergency room. Those were for emergency, place for primary care. We all agree with that. But we've always had 100% free access.
I think it's fair to say that Senator Paul and I have some slight philosophical differences. My profound question to Dr. Krauss is, do you, as an employee at a federally qualified health center, consider yourself as a slave?
I love my job. I chose to work there. I do not feel like a slave. Thank you.
Ms. Draper.
Anyway, right? So it's literally true what I said, right? Let me, how do I exit this? Stop sharing. Okay. Did you get that?
Yeah. It was kind of like a reach.
Well, I'm not going to comment on it, but now you know how they think. And you also know Bernie's reply. So anyway, right is slavery. And that also means that I'm your slave, right? Because you're in public education. So, you know, you should donate to my GoFundMe page. Stop the slavery. Anyway, that's kind of at the basis of this, right? So you have a very strong anti-rights ideology. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody is equal, of course not. There's a hierarchy in neoliberalism, very, very, very steep hierarchy, but it is based on money, Ayn Rand would say. Yes, people are going to dominate each other, but it's better to dominate each other through money than through force, because nobody gets hurt, she thinks. Because it's okay if I dominate you as long as I pay you for it, because then you're not a slave, which is true. Now, what are the economics who would go along with this, right? Because you might think, well, okay, so in a society where nobody's helping each other and where we're all about ourselves, well, how is that going to end up good, right? Well, it will, because of the market. Neoliberalism is all based around the idea. At the very core of this is the idea that the market has a kind of inherent, almost metaphysical balancing effect, right? That the market, supply and demand and competition, that the combination of this is kind of like a magical formula that humans found, right? God created the universe and he put in a cheat code, and that cheat code is the market. And once we understand this cheat code, we understand kind of how everything is going to be all right. Because the market as this kind of, you know, the invisible hand is going to make everything all right. If we just all compete in this market, right? If we take market principles, competition, private property, and supply and demand, if we take them and we apply this principle to everything in life, everything, then we will reach utopia. That's the idea. And I'm very kind of sharp here, maybe. You can argue with me afterwards. But I want to stress this kind of, I think, almost religious argument that neoliberalism has, because it's a blind faith. It also has this idea in the face of disaster. For example, Rand Paul right now is strongly arguing against any measures against coronavirus. He wants all business to be open fully, no restrictions, no masks, nothing, right? Because he believes that the market is going to solve it in the end. It's a bit like the scene I have at the bottom where Moses comes down with the 10 commandments and he finds that the people are worshipping a golden bull. Guess what the symbol of Wall Street is? Now, I'm not making fun of it, but I'm pointing out to something maybe sensitive, right? But it's not just faith. There's a logic behind it, right? This is not like the golden bull. They don't literally believe in some kind of godly market creature. It's just faith in a certain logic. It's based in the same logic that we saw already, right? With liberalism of Adam Smith. The logic, and there is logic to the logic. The logic is that if we all want to get rich, if you all want to make money in competition with each other, we need to earn that money from someone. Therefore, we need to make ourselves useful. Right? We need to compete, we need to produce services, we need to try to please clients. And if we do that, well, we're going to be maximally useful. And that will cause more productivity and lower prices and better quality in the markets, right? And thus consumers will benefit from this competition. You all, I think, are very familiar with this argument. What's important is that Adam Smith is writing about markets as like physical places, as the market, like the supermarket, right? He's not talking about life in general. He's talking about production. Smith all kind of other theories about life in general. Neoliberals apply this principle to everything, not just production, right? In liberalism, this idea is just for the economy, or the core of the economy. Neoliberalism is the assumption that market competition is kind of just the solution to everything. And one difference with some other ideologies that think this is that this is global. If you remember, fascism is also competition based, right? They also believe that competition is the way forward, because competition is going to separate the weak from the strong, and the strong will survive, and then our genes will get better, etc., etc. But that is, in fascism there are teams. It's a competition between teams, between countries, right? And only one can win. It's a winner-takes-all kind of mentality that fascism has. It's either killed or be killed, prey or predator. Neoliberals are more optimistic people, like all liberals. So they don't see it as a zero-sum game. It's not a winner-takes-all game. They think that competition, that everybody can win in competition. And that makes neoliberalism a global ideology. It's for everyone, literally everyone on earth, right? That's one of its big strengths. It is explicitly globalized. It believes in a fully integrated world market. So everybody in competition with everybody, including Americans against Africans. And so we're all part of this market with complete free trade. That's kind of the utopia they want to reach. And that makes it very inclusive, right? It's not just talking to Americans, it's talking to everybody. Just like communism is for everybody and is utopic, so is neoliberalism. And that's nice. Now, that means, though, if you want to reach this utopia through complete market dominance, everything must be transformed into a market. And everything means everything, right? That means that everything must be private property. Everything in this world, except humans, should be owned by somebody. There should be no public land. There should be no public resources. There should be no rivers, no mountains, none of this. Everything should be private property. Complete privatization of every physical thing in the world and mental thing, right? Intellectual property. No commons, no Wikipedia, none of this. Also, everything should be a competition, right? So what's typical of neoliberalism is that they'll take these liberal principles, but they'll apply them outside the market. For example, within education, right? In a neoliberal spirit, you should see each other as competitors, right? Don't help each other with that homework, because if your classmate succeeds, then they will be competing with you once you graduate for that CEO position, and you don't want that, right? Because it's everybody for themselves. Don't be a slave, Miss Susanna, by helping other people. You can see this in tech. I taught in tech for years. In tech, people ain't helping each other. Oh, no. No. I've seen this sometimes intense awkwardness when somebody asks for help and gets ignored. One of the most visible things I once saw, you had this girl and she needed to switch the time at which she presented because of some emergency. And she asked in a classroom of 50 people, she got up, who can switch with me? And people didn't even respond. They didn't say no. They just looked at their phones for minutes. This went on for 5 minutes till I said, all right, class is over. I couldn't stand the awkwardness anymore, right? There's a more competitive edge there, right? And also, everything must be expressed in money, right? Everything must have a financial value to work in the system because everything is reduced to a market relationship. So there should be no things that are free. There should be no things that are just traded or things that you yourself. Everything should be commodified. But I want to give you an extreme example of this. I don't know how representative it is. It's a bit biased of me. But I want to give you a real life example of, let's say, where this is heading, right? It's about babies. And this is not fantasy. This happened to me, what I'm going to tell you. So when my wife was first pregnant, our health insurance covered a fancy private hospital in San Pedro because they had some kind of deal with it. And we said, all right, if the insurance covers it anyway, or for them, let's just go there, right? And we first noticed that this place was different because every single thing they did, they would charge you for. So if they touch you with gloves, then you would get a receipt that would bill the gloves. If they gave you a cup of water, they would charge you for both the water and the cup on a bill. So we already saw this is going in a weird direction. And at some point, when it was time to have the baby, they came to us with an offer. It's called their Apego package. Here's the thing they offered. They said, what you've paid for so far is for the doctor to get the baby out of you, right? So the baby's in you, doctor takes the baby out, now the doctor has a baby. Yeah. If you then want to hold the baby, that's a separate service, because that requires the doctor to move to you and give you the baby, which, you know, would be slavery if he would be forced to do so. So the standard practice, we take the baby out, we take it away, and 3 hours later you can pick it up, right? But if you want to hold the baby after it's born, which we can only do for 30 seconds, that's a separate package, right? To hold your own child. I'm not making this up. This happened, right? So guess how much this costs? This lasts 20 to 30 seconds. To the right to hold your own child. How much do you think that is? Any guesses?
$1,000.
Nah, that's too much. 3,600 pesos if you want to hold your baby after it's born. Your own baby, right? So, so they came to me like when he was born with like the ATM, not the ATM, like the terminal. Told them to fuck off. So we didn't do this, but it was funny. They were trying to guilt us into this. They were like, yeah, it's important for its long-term development. The first 30 seconds are crucial. Basically, we're selling us the idea that my son will become a criminal because we didn't hug him in the first 20 seconds after he was born. Anyway, this is real life, right? I'm not making this up. This is kind of where things are heading by this logic. Next time we might try public. Anyway, what kind of society does this lead to, right? Well, a get rich or die trying society, to bring the old 50 Cent album back. The society, I think they do it in most private hospitals in St. Pedro. This was Angeles, I think, hospital. What was I saying? What kind of society do we get here? Well, we get a society where entrepreneurs are seen as the leaders, right? Entrepreneurs become kind of the saints of society. People don't have posters of Che Guevara anymore. They have posters of Elon Musk, or that's the people that, you know, they have books from that they look up to. And it should be like that, according to neoliberal theory, because, dear children, the rich people have earned their money through hard work, right? They've earned that money by getting up early at 5 a.m. They're part of the 5 a.m. club. And your lazy asses didn't do that. You are not rich because you didn't put in the hard work. Therefore, you should better respect them for this, right? Because you lazy, undeserving, scuffy people, you're not rich. Means you must have done something wrong. So we better respect these champions of industry, if only because we depend on them, right? Where would you be without them? Huh? Where are you going to work? Who creates the jobs here? You should be thankful that they exist. What would Mexico be without Carlos Slim? What would Mexico be without Salinas, right? Just a bunch of indios under the palm tree. So we should be thankful for the rich and their existence. They're the ones who create society. They're the ones who create all this wealth because they get up at 5 a.m. and you don't. So policy-wise, right, neoliberalism actually favors the rich. This is different. In other systems that favor the rich, they favor the rich as an indirect effect. We saw this with liberalism, with John Locke, also with fascism. All these ideologies end up favoring the elite because of their consequences. but the theory is not that you should favor the elite, right? They're not that explicit about it. Neoliberalism, the idea is, since the rich carry society, right, we should favor them. We should fear them a bit like you fear God. So you should try to please them. They should pay less taxes than you, because they're the ones who make things happen, because they get up early. That's kind of the implication behind Ayn Rand's novel, right? Atlas Shrugged. What does that mean, Atlas Shrugged? Atlas is the guy, the Greek mythological guy who holds the world. He carries the world on its back, right? He's the rich guy. So the rich are carrying the world on their back. And if Atlas shrugs, then the world would fall. And we don't want that to happen, right? So we should favor the rich. And we should identify them. We should identify which elite we want to be. We should try to understand their struggles, right? You should watch the Kardashians and see what millionaires are dealing with. And forget about your own petty little problems in your life. So neoliberalism is about creating the rich as champions, right? Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos. These are your heroes. Yes, Mariana. You wake up too late. Now, what then about the other people in society? What about the poor? Well, el pobre es pobre porque quiere, right? That's the idea, right? Poverty is primarily people's own problem, and usually their own fault. Not always. Sometimes something bad happens to them. But in any case, it is their own problem, because everybody's responsible for their own actions. So poverty is not really a political issue, right? Because life is a game. It's Monopoly. And the game has very clear rules and everybody can play it. And well, if you don't win, that's the game, right? You cannot choose not to play the game, but everybody is in this game and it's about playing the game right. And that's going to imply winners or losers. And if you not part of the 5 a.m. club, then you're going to lose. And that's on you, suckers. So the poor are not a political issue, right? Neoliberals don't hate the poor. They're not fascists. They don't think poor people should die or that the weak are a burden on society or none of that. But in fact, it's good for neoliberalism in a way. Not neoliberalism. It's good for capitalism if there's poor people, because that suppresses wages. Poverty is functional to capitalism, but they don't care, right? In neoliberal ideology, poverty is not a political issue. It's a personal issue. It's not something that the president should be concerned with. It's something that you should be concerned with, and you should get your act together, right? Lazy asses. And if you care so much about poverty, Ms. Maria, then why don't you do something about it? If you really care about poverty, for whatever sentimental reasons, then you should give money to poor people, but not the government. So the real solution to poverty, if we have to have a solution, we don't necessarily have to have that, but if we have to have one, it's charity, right? Again, we should pray to these rich people and hope they give some money away. That's your best bet. Because life is fair as it is, and we should stop complaining about these things. That's kind of the neoliberal angle on poverty, right? Now, I want to point something out here before I stop for today. There is a gap that you have with any ideology between theory and practice, right? That's true with neoliberalism too. There's a big difference between neoliberal theory and neoliberal leaders. Neoliberal leaders in democracies still need to win elections, so they cannot literally do all of this, right? Within Mexico, only Mexico Libre has this position, that poverty is people's own problem, explicitly. The PAN does not say this. They think it, but they're not saying it, right? The PAN will now and then do things for poor people. For example, Vicente Fox made Seguro Popular, minimum health insurance system. So neoliberals will now and then do things that are not neoliberal. That doesn't change neoliberalism. That just means that sometimes they act outside their own ideology because they're good politicians and they kind of feel what they need to do in that moment, right? Just like now with the pandemic, neoliberalism in principle is against any measures taken by the government. So no lockdown, no nothing, no restrictions. But some neoliberal leaders, because their country is going to hell, might still do that, right? They'll do it very short. For example, Netherlands is a good example. That just means they're not being neoliberals that weak. But it doesn't mean that the theory changes, right? I hope you have that clear. Politicians are not bound to their ideology, right? They can act outside of it, just like socialists can sometimes act in non-socialist way and accept cooperation with private companies, etc. All right, I'm going over my time. So do you have any questions that I can answer for now? We'll keep going next time. I guess not. All right, if you have to go to your next class, dear students, then I will let you go, but I will answer any questions that you have. I don't see this like Rich. Okay, Fernando, let me try to answer that from their point of view. They would say, no, it's ideology for everybody that will allow everybody to get rich. But it's an ideology. Sorry?
Hello, teacher. Oh, my name is Guillermo. Yesterday
Yes.
I just talked with you about my situation.
Yes.
I'm here in the class and I'm reading about neoliberalism. So I have one question.
Okay.
What really neoliberalism is? Because, for example, yesterday I was reading about it and I saw that the historical, I think, meaning is not that we saw in class. For example, the meaning, historically meaning, born in 1930 in the head of Alexander Gustav, that thinks that neoliberalism is more a concept between capitalism and socialism. History, because that is history, or I don't, sorry, my English is very bad. Can I speak in some Spanish or?
If you have to.
Okay, sorry. Vi que el concepto histórico del neoliberalismo realmente se remonta a 1930, pensado por Alexander Gustav, un intelectual alemán socialista que cree que el neoliberalismo es una mezcla más entre socialismo y capitalismo. Y eso me confundió.
Well, to answer your question, I've never heard of that. As far as I know, the first theorists, economic theorists, who were also from that side of the world, you would have, what's his first name? I forgot what his first name is, but Hayek, he was an Austrian economist. And you have Friedman in the United States
teacher.
from the Chicago School. And they're the two economists who kind of pushed this earliest. You have people before them, maybe that they're inspired on. But neoliberalism is definitely not a variant of socialism. It is explicitly anti-socialist. I think any neoliberal would say that.
Sorry, teacher. My app is not working very good.
Okay.
Oh yeah. So, but why a lot of intellectual in for example in Chile say that like the original meaning born in 1930 in Alexander Gustav head or think?
I don't know. I think they're plain wrong. It doesn't connect to anything I know about it. So I don't have an answer to that.
Okay. Sorry.
I think that the people who created this are the most famous ones are Hayek, Friedman, and I. This real politics. Maybe the inspiration of them goes back to these people. That's very possible. So probably then that's where this originally came from. But as a policy practice, right? It originated in the 60s, 70s, 80s. But okay, so my answer your questions, then I don't know. I'm sorry for that. But it's good that you're reading on your own. So you could maybe read their book and see if that relates.
Thanks, teacher.
Okay, good. Any other questions? No?
No.
Okay, good. Then we will continue next time. All right. See you later. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good
Have a
day.
nice day.
Thank you, teacher.
Bye.
Thank you.